In part one, we looked at some of the damages this cyclone has wreaked upon the people, their livelihoods, the land, rivers, coast, vehicles, houses and infrastructure. We also explored the question, what was the cause of Cyclone-23 Gabrielle, and present doubt to the likelihood it was a response to global climate warming due to human greenhouse gas emissions. This means it was more likely either entirely a natural event, or if at all human caused, then geoengineering may have been at play. In part two, we compared official government numbers of deaths and unaccounted for persons with what residents have been seeing and saying, and noted a wide gap. We also compared independent community actions to recover, restore and thrive with the actions of government and agencies and other organisations, and noted deficiencies. Let us return now to the cause of the cyclone and the politics, science and narrative driving the human-caused climate warming agenda. The narrative of the United Nations International Panel on Climate Change affiliated governments and mainstream media that this event was due to human-caused greenhouse emissions is concerning, without foundations, and is alarmist. The following recent 11th of April 2023 statements by the World Economic Forum, WEF, in New Zealand, 750,000 people live in areas at risk of extreme flooding, and the country's Hawke's Bay area is already under threat from rising seas, are alarmist and a stretch. Whether greenhouse emissions have a measurable global influence on natural climate trends has yet to be demonstrated. Many distinguished scientists refuse to participate in the IPCC process, and others have resigned from it because in the end, the advice that the panel provides to governments is political and not scientific. Despite the expenditure of tens, if not hundreds of billions on climate research since 1990, the science arguments for a dangerous human's influence on global warming have, if anything, become weaker with the establishment of the IPCC. Yet the rhetoric of alarm in its reporting has been successively ramped up. Many different fields of study are involved, and all are the subject of intensive ongoing research. From this research emerges one implacable fact that, despite the numerous promulgations of new alarmist headlines in the media, in no case yet has any climate-sensitive environmental parameter been shown to be changing at a rate that exceeds its historic natural rate of change, let alone in a way that can be unequivocally associated with human causation. For example, despite numerous attempts to link an increase in the intensity or number of cyclones to late 20th century warming, convincing statistical evidence is absent. Similarly, the rates of sea level rise, now predicted by the IPCC, is inconsistent with the expected natural rates of rise that have been documented from tide gauge records over the last 200 years. Also, that the IPCC relies so heavily upon complex general computer modelling generated scenarios as the basis for its climate alarmism is, in point of fact, alarming in its own right, and the evidence for dangerous human-caused global warming forced by carbon emissions contribution is extremely weak. Further, the work of science has nothing whatever to do with consensus as flouted by the IPCC concerning its choice of scientists to be complicit to its agenda. Consensus is the business of politics. Science, on the contrary, requires only one investigator who happens to be right, which means that he or she has results that are verifiable by reference to the real world. As President Václav Klaus of the Czech Republic delivered in the US Congress Committee on Energy and Commerce said, man-made climate change has become one of the most dangerous arguments aimed at distorting human efforts and public policies in the whole world. In a democracy, the media serve to convey to the public the facts and hypotheses of macroeconomics, wars, climate change, pandemics, as provided by individual experts, including scientists, governments, and international research agencies, and NGO and other lobby groups. In general, the media, just as for the COVID-19 pandemic, have promulgated an alarmist cause for climate warming. They have certainly failed to convey the degree of uncertainty that is characteristic of climate science, or a balanced summary of the many essential facts that are relevant to human causation. Just like for the COVID-19 pandemic, for which it was richly incentivized, it is plain that the mainstream media has failed in their role as public watchdog against the specious pleadings of contemporary climate alarmists. Indeed, the mainstream media itself is a self-interested party to such debates and therefore can also be complicit in causing great harm. From my personal experience in working for national and regional government in New Zealand, it is the former's failure to guide and require the latter to provide responsible usage zoning of land prone to flooding into the future, in particular extreme flooding. But it has instead promoted policies for ongoing numbers of people and businesses in vulnerable areas, or without adequate mitigation measures such as high standard flood protection schemes should occupation be consented, all in the name of business profit in the growing GDP economy. Canterbury New Zealand Water is a case in point, with the sacking of its regional councillors in 2010 by the then National Party government in favour of selected versus publicly elected commissioners, an early sign of dictatorship versus democracy. There is also a long history of clearing the land from native forests and replacing these with pasture, which has reduced the water holding capacity of that land and instead facilitates faster runoff and drainage via waterways and downstream catchment flooding, another undersight of government long-term planning. And of course, planting the land in exotic conifer plantations has not been helpful, notably because of soil acidification and soil loss in relation to harvesting, as well as the removal of waste wood known as slash, creating, in the case of Cyclone-23 Gabrielle, an enormous clean-up problem of waterways and coastal beaches in the North Island's east coast, including Hawke's Bay. Time appears right for we humans to take responsibility for ourselves in a new form of governance, which is decentralised, ecosystem-centred, holistic, sustainable, and which presents no further harm to people, other life, and planet. Time is right for we humans to also stop giving away our personal power by trusting in the form of a vote to a nature of governance which is hierarchical, innately and increasingly about control and compliance, highly prone to corruption and elitist self-interest, and to kidnapping ordinary people and other life along a sinister path into darkness. The Cyclone-23 event, not unlike the COVID-19 event, could, if geoengineered, be another attempt to create further fear and the saviour complex. That is, create the problem and be the solution. Ultimately, to help crash the global economy and centralise governments, more control, more surveillance and censoring, more compliance, and deeper enslavement. To be a slave is one thing, but to not realise you are a slave is a tragedy. We need to become aware of what is translating downward from global beginnings into our country's national to district laws and institutional arrangements. Who and what has the United Nations become? Who is who? And who and what is the WEF? And how have these institutions been shaping our future, our ecological, social, economic policies, laws, and legal frameworks, right down to local government level, to take away our freedoms, our speech, our assets, our integrity and respect as human beings, and in exchange for a very dark and scary transhumanist future? Yes, it's not just about simple robotics. There is a much bigger intention to merge human consciousness to a soulless, inorganic, synthetic, artificial intelligence, so-called directed evolution. What? Did someone say a population ratio of 1 human to 100 humanoids? Aside from the need for an independent, unbiased inquiry into global and national governance and a realignment of the media, it is proposed that an independent inquiry specifically into the drivers of climate change is also paramount. Such an inquiry would be designed to examine unbiased, uncensored science and scientists, corruptions in funding, corruptions in global institutions, national governments and media, the drivers of climate change, solar and other cosmic influences, greenhouse gas emissions, changes to land and land use, climate and lithospheric geoengineering, and to recommend necessary international oversight, policy regulation, monitoring and enforcement of geoengineering activities. This year and the years to come will be like no other. It is a hopeful time of ascending consciousness and humanity's shift towards complete freedom and a positive timeline for the first time after a very long history of conflict and legacy of unprecedented harm to our planetary ecosystem and home. So there is an opportunity also here in the Hawke's Bay for people to seize every perceived moment and shine a light for other New Zealanders and people worldwide to not simply repair this cyclone's harms to lives and livelihoods, but to act to create, cooperate and manifest a vision of a new Earth which is truly sustainable, ecosystem-centred, loving and connected, with the people up custody and governance at the community or other best fit level, and with national and global level participation, which functions strictly to oversee, support, guide, and serve the people, other life forms, our planetary home, and beyond. Aid. Field Messenger, Aotearoa, New Zealand.